Welcome to Building Legendary Leaders, the podcast where leaders leave behind chaos and step into clarity. This is where real stories come alive with the struggles, breakthroughs, and lessons that shape the most effective executives today. Every episode delivers fresh insights you can apply to your own leadership journey. If you are ready to stop putting out fires and start leading with purpose, this is the place for you. Here is your host, Jim Saliba.
All right, folks, welcome back to Building Legendary Leaders. Today, we have a man who knows a thing or two about navigating treacherous waters of corporate bureaucracy and turning that ship around. He's not just talking strategy, he lives it. He's slashed gross churn by nearly half and catapulted renewal rates into the upper 90s in a $250 million, yes, B in billion-dollar business. It's not just about the numbers for him. It's about grit, discipline, and relentless drive to see the problem, address it, fix it, and move forward, even if it means unlearning everything you thought you knew. When he's not busy running global enterprises, he's up in the air, a hobbyist pilot, probably applying the same meticulous precision to flying his Cessna as he does to leading 8,000 customers. Please join me in welcoming Kurt Haberkamp.
Thanks for having me on, Jim. Really happy to be here.
It's great to have you, Kurt. I want to tell the audience that remember, as I always say, have your notebook and pen or your keyboard ready to take notes because we have a lot to talk about, and this is going to be a great conversation today.
Awesome.
So, let me tell the audience what we're going to talk about. Today, we're diving into the headline of gravity because let's face it, leadership isn't about just rising to the top. It's about dealing with the crushing weight of reality. We're going to pull back the curtain on executive friction, empowering ownership, specifically how a leader like Kurt empowers his lieutenants to truly own their own piece of the business, not just be accountable, but own it, scar tissue and all. Building operating rhythms. We'll dissect the critical operating rhythms needed to keep these high stake operations humming along. Recovering with purpose, navigating exactly what to do when if things go sideways. And for those who stick around to the end, Kurt's going to spill the beans on his magic self-designed system for leadership success. You won't want to miss that playbook. So welcome, Kurt. It's great having you here today.
Thanks, Jim.
Before we go into the heavy friction and operating rhythms, I wanted to start off a little easy. I mentioned that you're a pilot in your free time. How did you get into flying a Cessna, and how do you translate that turbulence into running a $250 million business?
Sure. It was a lifelong dream of mine to fly. When I was a child and a young man, I had aspirations of becoming a military pilot. And I had a father who was a military veteran, a combat veteran, and he really, at the end of the day, didn't want me to join the military. And wanted me to pursue other things. And so that kind of dream of flight got put back for some time. And eventually when I had the time and the space and the availability to take it on as an adult, I was able to do that. And I think the best way I can talk about the translation is, one of the things you learn early is if you get behind the airplane, it'll kill you really quickly. And what instructors mean by that is there are things you have to stay on top of. You have to respect the airplane. You have to take it seriously because if you don't, really bad things can happen. And I really kind of try to live by that concept in my work life as well. Is we're in such a dynamic time right now. Technology businesses are changing rapidly. Teams' needs are evolving rapidly. Customer capabilities are evolving rapidly. And if you don't stay in front of the wave at least a little bit, if you're not at least paying attention, you're going to find yourself in an awfully bad position as your customers come into new capabilities and decide that maybe they don't need the value that you bring.
Great, great. I forgot to mention that your role in the organization that you're with. You're with UL, isn't that correct?
Yeah, so UL Solutions, we're the software, excuse me, we're the commercial arm of Underwriters Laboratories, and I work for what we call Risk and Compliance Software, which is our global software business. I lead the customer success organization and also the pre-sales organization globally for RNCS. And we have a healthy business with about 5 or 6 different solution lines, and I have a wonderful team that helps sell and manage and resell those businesses.
Great. So you have an organization that you are leading, and they're your lieutenants that we talked about in the agenda, and you give them a piece of business for them to run like they own it. It's theirs. Tell me more about that.
Well, I had a great mentor when I worked for MariaDB. Really influenced me at one point in time. He said, "Kurt, I don't need to be in the everyday operations of your business. I trust you, and you've proved yourself, and that's why you're here. Uh, I want you to run your part of my business like it's your own." And I try to do that with my people as much as I can. And what I like to do is give them goals, resources, and a vision. And I tell them, for example, here are the goals that you have for this year, this quarter, whatever the case may be, and here are the resources I'll give you to do that. My vision for how I would do it if I were in your place would be to execute in this way. But you know your people the best, you know your customers the best, you know your business the best. So you need to adapt that vision to what's going to work for your part of the business. And quite frankly, some line managers have a lot of trouble with that because they want to be told more discreetly what to do. And it takes a lot of work to get them to buy into the concept that they need to be not only accountable, they need to own that part of the business and drive it in the way that they see fit.
So we're talking about a little bit the difference between accountability and ownership. And this is something that I always talk about to many of my clients. Before I anchor you and how I look at those two, why don't you tell me your thoughts about the difference between accountability and ownership?
I think one of the easiest ways to look at it is accountability is oftentimes about activity, right? There's tasks to be completed, there's metrics to adhere to, and people guide their actions based on completing those activities or meeting those roles. When you own something, you have a lot more holistic viewpoint of it. You're not worried about just simply the history and the current state, but you're worried about the future. You're worried about growth, you're worried about evolution. I think people who really own what their function is or their business is or their role is try to take an approach that they're not just trying to meet some goals or meet some needs, but they're trying to evolve and get better and make the business better at all times. Um, I think a lot of people can be accountable by just running around and doing actions, but to really be an owner of a function or an owner of a business, you've got to think more broadly and you've got to apply, your skills and the skills of your team to making that piece of the business better all the time, as you move forward.
I like that. This is in line with what I talk to people about. Accountability is about things imposed by others and meeting that metric, meeting those goals. Very goal orientated, but ownership is more about the future. How do I take this? How do I look down the road? How do I continuously make this better? It's more of a personal choice rather than something imposed on me by my boss or by the company.
Yeah, and I think that's really the thing that some people have an issue with is it's that injection of personal liberty or utility. Um, I think you almost have to learn that for yourself by living it as a leader. I tell people all the time when they get promoted, like you should feel a significant amount of imposter syndrome for the next couple months because if you don't, then this role is not big enough for you to step into, right? And I think, Jim, until you kind of live that ownership, you kind of understand what that means. You have some failures, you have some wins. It's hard to understand the agency that you have as a leader. That's a big thing we talk about a lot is accept the agency that you have and lean into it. And it's easy to want to just fall back and let someone else make the decisions. And uh, if you allow me a quick anecdote, when I first was promoted to vice president at MariaDB, I remember a customer escalation call, and I've got my team on, I've got my support team, my services team, I've got my site reliability people on, I've got product people on, all these different things, and we're going through this just harrowing experience. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, this isn't going well. Like someone needs to step up and like fix this. And all of a sudden, the little voice in the back of my head said, "That's you, you idiot. You have to step up. You have to fix this. Like take control and move it forward." And that was an interesting point in my development as a leader. It was the first time where I realized, no, the cavalry wasn't coming. Right, I was the senior person in the room. I had to fix it. I had to wrangle people and stop the fighting and everything else. And I think that's something you have to come by on your own as a leader. You have to kind of figure out when that becomes your job.
You know, you talked about the imposter syndrome. I talk about 4 fears of leadership, in which that's one of them, that fear of incompetence, or what we call imposter syndrome. Another one is fear of failure, and we've known that since the first time we had to bring home that report card that we knew our parents weren't going to like. But how it shows up in our organizations is that we deflect the decision making. Like you said, I want to be told what to do. And you know why? So I can point the finger to somebody else when it doesn't go right.
Yeah, it's hard not to fall into that trap. And um, even I consider myself a fairly senior leader. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've gone through a lot of good things and a lot of bad things. And even recently in my own experience, my boss had to come to me a couple months ago during a really difficult time and say, Kurt, I feel like you've been a little defensive lately. And he's like, that's just not like you. And he's like, just take a step back and think about what's going on. Think about this experience and that experience. And he said, I think you'll see that, you've been a little defensive. And I think you need to work on that. And I stopped and I thought about it. I was like, yeah, oh my God, I really have. And it's something I pride myself on not doing, right? I try to be that person that's a collaborator and is looking for every opinion. But you get a little bit too much stress. Things get a little bit heavier, a little bit difficult in a certain time. And it's easy to say, whoa, hold on a minute. That's not my fault, right? When you don't need to say that. All you have to do is help and try to fix things and lead from the front when doing that. And there's no reason to be defensive at that point in time. So it's a trap. It's really easy to fall into.
Yep. Yes, very much so. That's that little voice in our head that helped us in the lions and tigers and bears time of human survival. But it's not the same in knowledge base office working leaders. That voice does not really always lead us in the best way. So we talked about how there comes a time where you have to take on that ownership and say, "This is you, you idiot, you do it." So now you have to move that forward. We talked about operating rhythms. How does your leaders, or how do you help your leaders build those critical operating rhythms? And well, actually, first, why don't you tell us what they are and then how to do them?
Well, we use a concept here that we refer to as just colloquially as the MOR, so management operating rhythm. And the idea behind that is whatever your function is in the revenue organization, um, we want to build a guide for you as a leader to know what good looks like. It's not about accountability or about activity. It's, I've had to flex on this recently because I have some new leaders I brought into the organization that might not be as experienced as they could be. And I've promoted some people into leadership roles. And I've had to be a little more prescriptive than maybe my impulse would say. And so what we do is we try to give a model on a weekly, biweekly, monthly, and quarterly basis for what does good look like in the role. what are the things that you should be doing to accomplish the needs of the role. This isn't a prescriptive thing of saying you need to have a meeting on Wednesdays with your team to do this, that, or the other. It's more about the dynamics of the organization and what you need to own as a leader, and giving you a framework for if you're not experienced in doing that, how you can go about doing it without just letting that time eat you up. Because I think every revenue leader knows that if you allow the small things to monopolize your day, they become the big things, and all of a sudden they take over your entire week. So it's about giving everyone just a viewpoint into what good looks like, so that they don't have to guess about that.
Love that. I talk a lot about transparency and how do you tell your people or show them your exact words. I say all the time, what does good look like? This is what good looks like. Are we agreed on what good looks like? You tell me what you think good looks like, rather than telling the tasks that have to be done.
I think calibration is really important there, Jim. One of the things that I'm working on now is we're looking at offering a little bit more to our customers. Let's just say that from a customer success perspective, because the industry is changing very rapidly. Customer success is becoming a lot more about value. It's about to demonstrate return on investment to customers. And so, in doing that, we need to know what good looks like for that part of the equation. And not only do all my managers need to be able to look at an individual and say, yeah, Steve's a 3 out of 4, or no, Steve's a 4 out of 4. But I want like my sales leadership peers, I want my boss, I want the head of the P&L to be able to look at the same person with the same calibration in mind, and be able to say, yeah, Steve is a 3, and we think he's got a lot of potential to be a 4. Because as we look at the kind of the change in the business right now, I think it's human interactions and human skill that are going to win the day for a lot of customer success organizations, because all the little stuff can be done with AI. And so we have to know what good looks like, and we have to be able to share what good looks like. And the easy way to do that, from my experience, is to just calibrate to something.
Yes, if we don't know what our goal is, what our vision is, what good looks like, these are all the same kind of things. It really gives us a target to move to rather than just doing a task. I talk to many people about when we measure things, there's 3 levels. We can measure activity. That's easy. How many phone calls did I make? How many leads did we generate? That's easy. Output is the next thing. Well, I release software X number of times. That's output. But outcomes is harder. And if our vision is around outcomes, it really gets us to why we are there, owning, back to that word, owning the piece of business that we have.
Yet it's I think customer success is a place that is well suited to that, but it's also uniquely difficult, especially so if I were back at MariaDB, wonderful company with a wonderful suite of products, but it's a small suite of products. Um, Dynamic in its use, but small suite of products. UL Solutions has a wonderful suite of software. We cover off a lot of needs of our customers, especially in the supply chain business. In order to really be focused on customer outcomes, you have to know about their business, you have to know about their use case, and you have to know about the value that it brings to them, and you have to be able to calculate what that looks like. So, for customer success, it can be really difficult, because you may have to flex from one account one day that has, um, a use case rooted in efficiencies in the supply chain, and the next day flex to a customer that is looking to gain insights on their Scope 3 emissions. And those calculations, those use cases, those business cases are completely different. So as we move to an outcome-based organization, we have to do a lot of work to helping our people understand how they get to those outcomes. And part of that is why does it matter to the customer, which I think is the hardest thing to learn. So in the CS world, we want to be in outcomes. And I think it can be very difficult to do so.
So we talked about owning their piece of business, having the vision and what good looks like to get there. And we're leaving people to be creative, to put together their rhythms to get there, not just completely doing status over again in one on ones. But the next thing is if they're trying to do things on their own, they're experimenting, things do not always go right, as we always know. No matter how experienced we are, things change, things move, things happen. So, how do we navigate to allow people to have these failures and also recover from them?
Yeah. Well, I think most of what happens in the negative when there's failure, and even just the thought of it itself, it's all fear based, right? Um, so you have to set the tone that failure is okay, right? You want to fail quickly, and you want to create an environment where people are not afraid to ask for help when they do fail. Um, Human tendency I find is to try to hide failure. But when you look at some of the most successful people in the world, they'll proudly talk about their failures, every day. I think probably the most valuable formative experience for me in my career so far was a failed IPO at MariaDB, and how do we get back from that? How do we keep the business moving forward? So I just was talking with one of my leaders today, as we talk about being more gross churn centric in our metrics, and that leader was really concerned about some of the churn that can happen with kind of things outside of our control, and having that reflect poorly on their people who they really like, really care about, really work closely with. And I had to just say several times, like, look, you have to understand, you've got to let go of that fear. This is just one small piece of how we're going to measure performance. And I promise you, no one is going to judge your people based on just that churn number alone. Right. There are other factors at play, other metrics. So you have to try to create an environment where you get rid of that fear of failure, you get rid of that defensiveness, and you get people to understand that it's okay if you fail. It's what do you do after that? Go ask for help. Go learn from it. Go make the situation better. It's just about building a culture that doesn't fear failure.
I love that. You put in the term there that we talk a lot about, that we hear often, fail fast. I don't necessarily like that term. I like learn fast.
Yeah.
How would that be different in a culture that you're trying to build if we talked about learning fast rather than failing fast?
Well, I think it's just centering around the idea that you learn from every bump in the road, right? If we don't want to use the term failure, I think that's a great thing to do. Um, you just got to stress the learning that comes from it. So if you have a a customer that churns for a given reason, right? Even if it's something overt, occasionally we have customers that suffer in silence, and things get missed, or we have customers that really just don't like us or don't like the customer rep or something on those lines. Even in an overt case like that, you have to turn it around about what can you learn from it, right? If you've made a significant mistake that led to a churn, it stings, right? But learn from it. Just don't do it again. Make it about the outcome again of learning and getting better. Because another thing I tell people all the time is you're if you don't if everything is easy, you're never going to get better. You're never going to learn. Like, you shouldn't want an easy job. If you have any upward mobility ambition at all, you should never want a job that seems easy.
So you have a magic self-designed system for success. I told people you're going to spill the beans on your playbook.
I don't think there's any real magic to it, Jim, and I think it's really rooted in the things that we've talked about here today. The first thing is you've got to take ownership for your responsibility, your business, your team. However, it doesn't really matter what the role is, right? If you perform as an individual and you create some sort of outcomes for a customer, you've got to take ownership of that, because the first thing that comes with ownership is pride. And if you don't have pride in the business that you provide, if you don't have pride in the results that you create, you're never going to drive it to the place that it needs to go. You're never going to grow whatever you're doing. So taking ownership and creating a pride of ownership, I think, is really important. I think then when you're looking as a leader who leads other leaders, you have to instill in them a sense of their agency. And what I mean by that is each person in the organization, and I found this a lot at UL, wonderful leaders that have been with the company for a long time. UL is a special place. The amount of people in the revenue org that have been with the company 20 years, 25 years, 30 years beyond, you simply don't find that in software. But a lot of the people who are wonderful people with well experienced careers at the company, tons of respect, didn't understand what their agency was. It didn't understand what impact they could have and what influence on others that they could have and what decision making authority they have. So you've got to get your leaders to understand the agency that their role holds. And then you really have to drive, in my opinion, a culture of true collaboration. Um, a good friend of mine recently told me, Kurt, to be truly cross-functional, it takes a lot of backbone. And it does, because you have to hold others accountable. People oftentimes that aren't accountable to you directly, and you have to find a way to make everybody a collaborator, whether they're your biggest fan or your biggest enemy. Right? We're all in communities at work, and we have to find ways to work together. And so you've got to build that pride of ownership. You have to get a leader to lean into the agency that they have and understand the influence that they have. And then you have to get them to collaborate strongly with every other peer that matters, because we can't be siloed anymore in this age. We can't worry about turf. We can't worry about whose job is what, whose influence should be where. We simply have to bury all that stuff. We have to look at the virtues that working with each other has, and we have to collaborate and work together. So really, when I try to bring a new leader into the organization, I look for someone who has the capacity from a human capital perspective to take ownership of something, to learn what they need to learn, to understand the agency and have the courage to lean into that, because we don't like to be wrong. We don't like conflict as humans. We have to force that a little bit. Uh, and then find someone who has the desire and the personality to collaborate and to work across the aisle with other people. Typically, I find if you have those four things, you're going to have a really good shot at developing a good leader.
I really agree with what you're saying here. And I want to bring in, you said things are moving faster. Um, we're talking about AI in this case because that's the newest accelerator of many businesses today. And it's interesting that AI didn't take over the conversation, which rarely happens in today's conversations in business. But what I'm seeing is that AI is having a lot of companies struggle. How am I using AI? How to make it happen? But what's really happening is that AI is showing up the problems, the weaknesses, the cracks in their leadership chain.
I would agree with that, and I think that one of the big challenges is I think I read the other day 40% of all current AI projects will be canceled just for lack of resources. It's a wonderful piece of technology that we're using a lot, and I use a lot in my personal life as well. It's a force multiplier, um, and it gives everybody the ability, if they figure out how to do it, to cut through the BS. You can really get to a decision point quickly when you use it well grounded. I mean, that's very important. But when you use it in a well grounded way to help you facilitate decisions. And so at a point maybe 5 years ago, before we really got into this mess, I think it was a lot easier for people to kind of BS, to be honest, um, because we had domain expertise in different areas. Everyone's days were usually pretty full with their own domain and trying to figure things out. And if you went to a peer and said, hey, I need this from from you, and their response was, "Oh boy, Kurt, I'd love to do that, but we can't for this reason or that reason." It's a force multiplier in trying to understand business concepts, technical concepts. You can really get to the answer of whether or not that statement's true really quicker. So um, I think some of the gaps that it exposes are a lack of knowledge, a lack of maybe work ethic at times. You can kind of find the people that are hiding, right, and not contributing the way that they should be, and you could find that because you have access to more information than you've ever had. And I think I work with other leaders in our business to try to get them to use AI more. I was one of the early adopters of it in our organization, and the amount of fear that exists, and also the amount of maybe misplaced complexity, I think is a good way to say it. I'll have another leader come to me and say, "Well, Kurt, I tried to use it to do this, but I couldn't." And I'll say, "Okay, let's sit down. Tell me why you couldn't do it." And they'll get to a natural point where they just don't know what to do. And my response is, "Well, ask it, or just try something, or keep iterating." The advice I usually give people as they're trying to build something with it is just keep going, no matter how many little failures you have. Just keep iterating until you get to a point where there's something that you can't do organizationally. You had to open a ticket, you have to get a permission, you need to buy a software or a service or something you don't have access to. Drive until you get to one of those barriers you can overcome it, and then continue. And I think unless you've been in a role or a hobby or something where you have to keep trying, you have to keep iterating, you have to have the fortitude to keep going, people fall down with it. And I think that's why a lot of it fails.
Yes. So I'm going to switch gears a bit. Let's get to know you more, Kurt. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and maybe a story about when you were growing up there.
Sure. I grew up initially on the south side of Chicago, and early in life, my parents moved us out to the suburbs to escape there was some crime issues and things going on. And my parents were blue collar folks. My dad's no longer with us, but he was a military guy, and then worked for a family manufacturing business. My mother, when I was young, worked in a hospital cafeteria, and over the course of, oh boy, it had to be almost 25 years, put herself through an associate's degree, one class at a time. But very hardworking people, and we never really had much, but we had two people steering the ship that were in touch with each other and working very hard. And I was a goofy kid growing up. I was a smart kid, and I was little, and I got just bullied incessantly in grade school and junior high and things like that. And it really shaped my personality early. I became kind of meek, kind of fearful. Um, and I had made a new friend who came to town. He came from Georgia, um, and he was like, why do you? Who cares? Like, why? Like, don't let people push you around, right? You're figure out your own path forward. And it set me on a path. I kind of decided at that point in time I was going to learn to fight. And so when I was about 14, I got a job, so I could go and start taking some martial arts lessons and some boxing lessons, things like that. And I became a fighter, and it gave me a lot of confidence, and it kind of uh, gave me a new persona. And maybe at times I think I even became too much in that other. I swung too far to that side, and had to learn how to not let certain aspects of that kind of overtake me. To this day, I'm 48 years old. I still train in jujitsu when I can. I still love to be around that type of community. I love the people. But what it's done for me is I think it's really helped me develop as a leader, because I've been the little guy. I've been kicked around. I've been bullied and made fun of and whatnot. And uh, I think it helps me put myself in somebody else's shoes and try to understand what they're going through. So whenever I have somebody who suddenly just something's going completely wrong with them, my first thought always goes to, well, what's going on? Like there's just somebody not performing. There's got to be something else happening with them, and try to go figure out what that is. Uh, but it's also given me the fortitude to be courageous when I need to, and to look after myself and look after my folks and my team and look after my customers' needs. Um, I really dislike bullies, and I really dislike people that abuse the virtue of power that they're given. And I think a lot of that comes down to those experiences in my childhood of having to endure some humiliation, to be made fun of, and to get kicked around and pushed around because I was little. Um, I think it's just made me a more well-rounded human being, and I think it's one of those things that can break you if you let it. Um, but if you don't, it's we talk about learning, right, and overcoming things. I think it just makes you a stronger person, a more compassionate person in the end. And I look back on those days now, and I wouldn't trade them for anything because they made me who I am, right?
So that being bullied allowed you now to have what we call today the emotional intelligence to see when things are not quite right with your leaders or people around you in the office, is what I'm hearing. And now your martial arts are building the courage to go and do something about it.
Yeah, I like to think that's true, Jim, right? I think sometimes we can have idealistic viewpoints of ourselves, but I really like to think that's true. I really try. I guess I'm not the kind of person that cares about what other people think of me, but I'm the kind of person that wants to be good, right? Like I want to be there for my folks. I want to teach them. I want them to feel like they can come to me with things. Um, so I like to think that that's true. Maybe I have an over idealistic viewpoint sometimes of myself, but I like to believe that that's true.
So, if people are listening to this, what is the nugget you want them to take from our whole conversation and try out on Monday morning?
That's a good question. I think if you're a leader of people, and especially if you're a leader of other leaders, I think the thing I want to impart to someone is learn to let go of your need to control everything. And if you have the right people, trust them to take on the things that they own for you. Allow them to grow, because one of the best things that can happen is when the people that report to you all grow, because that rises the tides of everybody, right? Every boat in the harbor rises when everyone grows together. And if you're an individual contributor, or self-employed, or you run your own business, I think one of the most important things that I've learned is to embrace, let's use your learn fast concept. Let go of fear, right? And go out and try different things, and don't be afraid to learn quickly, because I think with the pace of change that we're in now, we all are going to have to try several times to find our path forward. And if you allow failure or an incomplete choice to rule what comes next, then you're probably in for some bad things. So be flexible, be brave, keep on getting out there and swinging.
Try something, anything.
Yes, and if it doesn't work, try something else. I think the fortitude is an excellent skill that you develop through being knocked down, and it's something that is extraordinarily valuable that I don't think we have enough of today.
This is a great conversation, Kurt. I enjoyed having you here. Why don't you tell people how they can continue a conversation with you? How could they reach you?
So I'm publicly out there on LinkedIn. Um, I try to be pretty responsive, and that's usually the easiest way to reach out to me. I'm pretty active on the platform. I don't like social media for the most part. I'm not a Facebook person or whatnot, so my only real social media is LinkedIn. Um, so that's probably the easiest place to find me. I work for UL Solutions, and pretty easy to find there as well. And then I'm also out. I do some charitable work. I work with Senior Services of Will County, which is a very important charitable organization here that's going through some rough times at the moment, and we're trying to help stabilize it and build it back better. Um, but I also work with a couple different startups, early stage startups right now as an advisor and helper. So I'm kind of all over the place, but LinkedIn is the easiest place to find me.
That's great. And that's another episode of Building Legendary Leaders, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Jim.
Building Legendary Leaders podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.